I'm Darrell Blanks, and this is Shana Matamala, and we are from the Association of Independent California Colleges and Universities Education. So it's a big name of an institution that's basically the teacher education part of that Association of Independent Colleges here in California. And we're here to hopefully help all of you to get back in the groove of doing TPA Cycle 2. I am from Fresno Pacific University in Fresno, and I'm the TPA coordinator along with we're little, so I wear a few hats. And Shana, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Shana Matamala. I'm from University of Verne, and I'm the Director of Teacher Education. Welcome, it's so good to see so many of you.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. We were saying that earlier we did Cycle 1 and had 110 people attend. So we really hope we're providing a service here for folks. This is what we're going to do today. So we're going to start with just some general reminders of where resources are. This is a great time to access those resources because the state is currently not charging you. And so that just came out in the PSD news today. They finally get that set up to where you register for the TPA, there will be a zero balance on that checkout. So this is the time to do that before that gets then we're gonna go over Cycle 2. I'm gonna go over kind of big picture, and then Sean's gonna take us through the details of that, and we're gonna stop along the way and answer questions and try to help you out in that regard. So let's kind of get started. You know, the first thing that we want to kind of remind you of is that all the TPAs have a performance assessment guide, and these guides really have been revised and worked with every year to have the greatest detail of information on how to complete the TPAs. This is your fundamental resource for accessing these. And when you register with Pearson, you have access to the performance assessment guides along with the templates that are required for Cycle 2. Logging into the CalTPA website, the CTC exams, like I said, once you get registered into your CalTPA, you have access to all the current templates and assessment guides. I want to make just a quick comment, and that is many folks worked on these before this time. Maybe they worked on them last year, or they have an old video and they want to put that together and throw it in. I would suggest that you move all your content to the new templates. They will still score them on the old templates, but the new templates have been revised to help address issues that have come up with people not responding to certain aspects of the TPA. And so it's really to your advantage to move the content over to the new templates. And those are accessed when you register for the TPA. Remember that once you register in Pearson with the TPA, you have 1 full year to complete that. So from that date that you register, you have like a whole year to get that done. So there's really not a super good reason to wait till the very last minute to get registered. So we're going to take a second and kind of go over the big picture of how Cycle 2 works. Cycle 2 follows the same 4-step plan Cycle 1 does. You begin by planning a series of lessons. Those lessons are in one particular content area or one particular set of standards. You teach those. Cycle 2 is a little more dependent upon the video evidence than Cycle 1 was. Then you reflect on a formal assessment that you're going to have. Then using that formal assessment data, you plan a follow-up lesson. So we'll get into the weeds about this a little bit more, but it's that same cycle of planning, teaching, assessing, reflecting, and applying. And so the evidence they're going to gather for Cycle 1, the first step, is they're going to ask you for the context of your class again. You don't identify focus students in this segment or in this TPA. One of the things they tried to do when they revised these, they tried to get rid of the overlap. And Sean and I have been around enough to remember the old ones. And in the old ones, it seemed like you were doing the same thing 4 times in some cases. And so they've tried to address that a little bit. Then you're going to plan learning segments. You're going to plan 3 to 5 lessons. We'll talk about those in a few minutes. And then you're going to plan 3 different kinds of assessments that'll match that learning segment, those learning segments. You'll include copies of those assessments, And for 2 of the assessments, you're going to need to have analytic rubrics that will take and evaluate students from not yet met to beyond. And again, we'll go over that in a little more detail. First big step is you plan. And I hope that one thing you'll see is that by planning really well, all the rest of the steps go really well. In step 1, just like in cycle 1, if you're real conscious about knowing what the TPA is going to require, and you make step 1 conscious toward those requirements, you'll be in great shape. Cycle 2 then is providing samples of your lessons that you teach. So again, you're teaching 3 to 5 lessons in the same area. You're going to have 4 sample clips from those lessons. You'll hear Shana say it, and I will say it because it's good to hear it a bunch of times. When you teach, record everything. You then just take samples of that. You'll take 4 samples. One will be on instruction and assessment of academic language. So you got a plan to have some academic language throughout the week. You have to have student use of educational technology. We'll talk about that a little bit. You'll have to have a place where you show instruction with informal assessment of the content that you're focusing on. And then you'll have to show where you are supporting students in self-assessment, both you showing them how to use self-assessment tool and them beginning to use that. And then there'll be 4 categories that you'll annotate for within those 4 samples. So just like cycle 1, you'll have some clips, and then you'll have some annotations you'll make for those clips. At the conclusion of your week, you are going to give a formal assessment. That formal assessment will be the culminating assessment for that week, and you're going to analyze that using a rubric. You're going to give feedback to your students on that, and you're going to provide 3 work samples. So the other piece of advice you'll hear Shana say a bunch of times, and I will say it here also, is keep all the student work samples for the formal assessment. Wait until, don't just pick some real fast and turn them all back to the students. Just hang on to them. If you got to make photocopies of them, just hang on to them until you're positive you've turned it in. I would maybe even keep it till you get your scores back and you're comfortable that you got everything ready to go. Because you got to turn in 3 samples, 1 sample that is not yet met, exceeded. Then what you're going to do is you're going to analyze that formal assessment. You're going to look for trends in data. You're going to look for patterns as to what students did well and what they still need to work on, along with how your instruction went. So you're going to analyze also how the instruction went. So, hey, it looks like this part of my week went pretty well. Now this part I think I need to work on a little bit. And with all that in mind, how the students did, how your instruction went, you're going to plan a follow-up lesson. This lesson will be recorded, and you'll turn in a 1 annotated video clip for this, up to 5 minutes. This will have to be based upon your formal assessment results. And so as we get into the weeds a little bit more about these assessment results, I hope what you can see is the importance in that planning phase of really planning good assessments and planning for content that you can work with, and knowing that you're eventually going to have to analyze your data and move on with a follow-up lesson. And so those are really the big pictures of it. You plan for 3 to 5 days. It has some certain components in it. You teach that, you provide samples like you did in your first TPA cycle, you do an analysis of your formal assessment, and then you do a follow-up lesson based upon the results of that analysis. Now, one of the things that should guide you along this way is the rubrics that are contained near the end. It's right before the glossary in the assessment guides. That's why the assessment guide is also important. These rubrics are the rubrics that are used, that the assessors use to score. So these are, in fact, the answers. So you should have those when you're planning and you ask yourself, well, what should student technology look like? There's a rubric for that. Go look at it and see what it says. There's a rubric for academic language. Go look and see what that says. Student self-assessment, it's a rubric for that. Go look and see what that says. See what the rubrics say. There are 9 rubrics in cycle 2. You need a score of 21 or more to pass with only 1 score of 1. So your goal is to get a 3, 4, 5 on each rubric and to really avoid 1s or 2s. Remember, the rubrics aren't perfectly clean cut. So one evaluator might think it's a low 2. One person might think it's a high 1. And so what you really want to do is just stay out of that area and be 3, 4s, and 5s. So you got plenty of space in case there's a little variance. Human beings are scoring these. Although they're very carefully calibrated, and they are cross-checked all the time against expert evaluators and against each other. So there's a very tight system that is in place for the evaluation, and it's very much based on what the rubrics show. There's 9 areas that they look at that are framed by these essential questions. The first 2 deal with the planning stage and how your lessons are all built together. The ones after that have to do with specific elements of your lesson, like education technology and formal assessment, giving feedback, and then the analysis of the formal assessment, and then your final follow-up, your apply step. Here's how the rubrics are scored, and we just want to take a minute or two to remind you of this. So the way that an evaluator does this, and we have both scored these for the state, and so I can't remember, what content area did you score them for?
For multiple subjects.
Multiple subject, and I covered high school, so I did math. So between 2 of us, we've looked at the whole gamut of the whole state. Not everybody, but we've looked at a lot of people. So the way these are scored is exactly the same with every evaluator. They start on level 3. They look at level 3, and they look at every single descriptor paragraph, and they look in the data set, the stuff that is part of 2.1. So right after 2.1 rubric, you'll see a list of where they pull the information from. And they'll look in there and they'll see, okay, do these learning segments have manageable content-specific goals that are appropriate to build clearly on prior knowledge? If they see that, that one's a pass. And notice the second one, UDL-based strategies are clearly described in 3 to 5 lessons. So when we talk about planning, Shana's going to tell you, you've got to have universal design for learning in your lessons. If it's absent, you get a 1. Because what happens is if they see one of these areas missing, they move you over to a 2. And then if it's missing, they move you over to a 1. It's not holistic. That is so critical to understand. So the goal is I would print these out, and I would have them out there when I'm planning, and I would ask myself before I turn this in, are these things evidenced in my planning? Now let's say you get all the areas of 3, then they go over to the 4 level, look for that evidence. Get all the areas of a 4, they look over to a 5. So that's how they progress up, and that's how they progress down using that. That's the calibrated way that they work through that. And like I said, they pull from one set of evidence. So it's really important to look and see where they're getting their evidence from for this. So for example, when you look at the student self-assessment, it's from the video clips and from one of the templates. So even though you might have a great descriptor for somewhere, you know, it might not be in the place where they're going to look. So you want to double check and make sure you're providing the evidence in the right spot. And so we want to take a second. We're going to switch gears here now. We want to go a little more in depth in all these steps. And what we're going to do is I'm going to stop sharing. Shana's going to pick it up from here. I'm going to watch the chat for questions, and then it'll also be time for us to pause and answer questions as things come up. So Shana is switching out here and taking control. And thanks. I'll mute my mic and hand it off to her.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I did see one question in the chat from Lauren, and she was asking if you can use the same video for the self-assessment and, like, say, for technology. So to answer your question, Lauren, no, you do need to use 2 different videos. It's not like your self-assessment could have technology in it, but then you need to use another video for technology. And I'm going to talk in depth about the videos in just a little bit, but that was a great question. All right. So this is going back into more detail about step 1. And just as Darrell was talking about, this is where you are going to write 3 to 5 lessons that are a part of one unit. And before you do that, you're going to, just like you did for cycle 1, spend time learning about your students. So you'll learn about their assets, their funds of knowledge, and all of that information that you're going to use to write your 3 to 5 lessons. So you are allowed to use some of the same information you collected from cycle 1 and put it into the cycle 2 template. You can even copy and paste some information, but you have to use the cycle 2 learning about students template. So yes, you can use some of the same background information, but use the correct template. Just as Darrell was saying, there's been updated templates. Make sure you're using the right one. Within those 3 to 5 lessons, you're going to be planning for 3 assessments. And this is the whole cycle is about assessments. So you're going to be writing a lot about these assessments. You're going to be writing about informal assessment, a formal assessment, and a student self-assessment. And for each of these, you'll have to talk about why the assessment is appropriate and what information you're going to be gathering in order to inform your instruction. So you're going to gather all this material and resources, and you're also going to include rubrics for 2 of the assessments, for the formal and the self-assessment. I'm going to go back for a little bit to the rubric that Darrell was just showing. Let me get to that. There we go. And in your 3 to 5 lessons, you need to make sure not only that you show UDL, but you also have to show in the multiple types of assessments, you have to use higher order thinking. And what I suggest is you actually bold whatever higher order thinking word that you are using. That way students are really clear, the assessors are really clear of, yes, you use higher order thinking. Additionally, you want to have adaptation strategies, and you want to be really clear for your ELs and also your neurodiverse learners, what adaptations you're doing. And then you want to talk specifically about your grouping strategies. So I know when I talk to students, sometimes I think grouping strategies is only when you get them like in partner groups or groups of 4. But grouping strategies also means, when are you talking to the class as a whole group? When are you having them work individually? And then of course, also when are you having them work in partner groups or in groups of like 4 or 5. So you want to talk about each of those grouping strategies and then a rationale for why it is appropriate for that particular part in your lesson plan. Great, so going back into here. And then I want to talk in detail, as I said, you're going to write a lot about your 3 assessments. The first one you'll write about is your informal assessment. And this is where you're really checking for understanding. And the idea of any informal assessment is it's also giving you data as the teacher of, what do my students know already? And what do I need to possibly reteach based on what I'm gathering from this informal assessment data? You're going to aim for using, looking and using higher order thinking. And some examples of informal assessments are individual whiteboards, class discussions. It can be partner groups, but you have to also be able to collect some type of data. So write about how is this information going to inform your instruction. You do not need to have a rubric for this informal assessment. All right, the next assessment you're going to write about in detail is the formal assessment. And as Darrell was saying, you want to really think about this in this formal assessment, because it's going to give you information on how they did on those 3 to 5 lessons. And so I always have my students talk about what would be a good formal assessment and what would not be the best choice for this particular case. So the problem with using things like multiple choice is it really does not give you a lot of in-depth data to write about. It might have been multiple guess. So I suggest that if you use multiple choice, you just use a few, and you really need to use some short answer, maybe some longer response, or some type of interactive learning. The other thing that you need to think about is that you do need to upload, like Darrell was saying, 3 work samples. So you can do some great things like debates or presentations or interviews or portfolios, but you also have to think about, how am I going to upload that work sample? Okay, so think about what will work to upload, whether it's pictures that can work, or presentations, but you do have to physically be able to upload that sample. The other thing to think about is that it needs to be 3 individual student samples. So sometimes I have students say, can I do group work? The challenge with that is you have to upload 3 individual work samples. So if it's any type of group work, you still have to have 3 separate ways to show what students are doing, and also score them all individually on rubrics. All right, and then the last assessment you're going to be writing about is a student self-assessment. And again, you're going to be using a rubric. And this rubric will actually be what the student is using. And in a second, I'll show you an example. So this is different than a peer assessment, or I know back in the day, I used to have like those English like checkoff list, like to make sure that I had everything in my paper before I turned it in. It really is a chance for students to think about their own learning and how they're doing so far in those 3 to 5 lessons. And are they prepared to take the formal assessment? So some examples are, I'm going to like doing a pair share exit ticket or student survey. So I'm going to do a new share and show you an example of a rubric. So here's an example. You want to have the criteria describing the outcomes down the left. So in this case, the students are learning to make up rhymes. And then the levels of performance with descriptors will go across the horizontal axis. So you can see the students are saying, I'm doing fine, I need some help, or I'm not sure. So one thing that we've been told as assessors is they don't want you using like emojis on your self-assessment. It should be more descriptive than that. So students can really go in there and write and circle how they're doing in particular areas. If possible, it's also great to have a place at the bottom where students can write why they scored themselves a certain way. So if I gave myself, I need some help, then at the bottom, I would write, this is what I need help in, this is what I'm understanding. So being able to have that spot at the bottom. If you're teaching TK or kindergarten or first grade, and maybe they're not able to write, you can also talk to them. They could circle the rubric, and then you can have those conversations of, okay, tell me, I see that you scored yourself as needing some help. Tell me a little more about that. And then you can actually write down their answers, what they told you. And I'll stop for a second. Do we have any questions in the chat, Darrell? We're okay?
Yes, I was just going to answer one of them in particular. I'm getting the
Okay.
YouTube channel where this will be posted to. It'll be posted to CCTE's YouTube channel. I'll post that in just a minute, so you can go to that and you'll find when it's posted there. That answers Sarah's question. And then what kind of formal assessments can we use for math for elementary grades?
Great. So there's a number of things you can do. You can actually use where they are working out problems, but also word problems are a great thing because you have to use a rubric to score your formal assessment. So I found that having word problems is a great way to use rubrics then to show how students are doing. Or you can use, for instance, in second grade, one of the standards that they're working on is telling time to the hour and the half hour. So maybe you could have those little small manipulative clocks like on their desk that they're working on, but then you have a worksheet that goes along with it where they're filling out what time it is. Hey, but you would write about in your lesson plan and in your formal assessment description that they also have those manipulative clocks that they're using in order to complete the actual physical assessment. So you want to think about, yes, you can have some problems, but also word problems are a great way to incorporate rubrics.
And then another one is if you copy and paste background information, is there a possibility of getting a condition code or having scores invalidated because of plagiarism or something of that nature being detected?
Great question. So you are allowed, and they have told us as scorers, to copy and paste for that section only. So basically you can't plagiarize yourself because the idea is you're working with the same group of students that you did for cycle 1. So you can use the same background information. So you will not get plagiarism concern for the class background section. Good question.
Yeah, and that's a good question. Also, when you copy and paste, double check the question or the prompt that you've copied into, because sometimes they're a little different from one to the next. So you don't want to just do a cursory look at it and then drop it in. That can sometimes catch you. What if you're teaching virtually regarding samples, especially if they are lower grades and your whole group?
Right, so you do have to turn in work samples. So it can be like a Google Doc would be a great way to turn in word samples. And then you can just download those Google Docs or a Google, Slides presentation. And you could save those as Word then or PowerPoint. And then you can upload those as your work samples. So it doesn't have to be a work sample like where the student's writing. It can be a virtual work sample.
And if you use something like Seesaw or some other tool like that that allows you to export their work, ClassKick does that also, then that would be another tool that you could use. What kind of assessments can be done in cycle 2 as they don't write?
Oh, so you're teaching like a TK or kindergarten, I'm assuming. And it matters, I don't know if you're doing language arts or math, but you can definitely do things where they're circling, where they're connecting. It doesn't have to be where they're writing words. And also, if you do ask them a question, you can have them verbally tell you, and you can then script out their answer at the bottom.
Yeah, that's a great example. I've also had students in TK and K online do responses where they have to order pictures of events for a story, where they have to pick things that are the same and different in some way. They're doing comparing and contrasting at a very basic level. So some of those kinds of things can work. Or what if you submitted the TPA cycle 1 another year and no longer working with the same group of students? Is that okay? Absolutely. It doesn't matter how that works. The thing for elementary, though, is you have to do 1 cycle in literacy, 1 cycle in math. So you got to remember what you did in cycle 1 if you're an elementary person, because you can't do 2 of the same the same content. Can't do math or literacy. Would it be acceptable if you write for them? Yeah, actually, Sean just gave that example. That's a great example, that you dictate their answers for them. That's that in small group work, as you're in small group assessment. Then when you talk about grouping, that's a great way of talking about why your grouping is purposeful, because you want to be able to get that oral responses down. Okay, and I think that's it for right now. I'm going to post the YouTube channel for CCTE, and you can pull that off there and then watch for that video. It's usually uplinked probably early next week sometime. I'll send it over to Allison to get that done tomorrow. Does it matter what area we choose in language arts? No, it's in literacy. It just has to be within the state standards. And then really take into account something really important, and that is that you have to show some higher order thinking, and you have to do some kind of formal assessment with it that can be analyzed. So you want to be a little careful not to pick a standard that kind of boxes you in, and you really can't do any higher order thinking, or you can't do much analysis, even if it's TK level. And when she talks about the analysis here in a minute, you'll kind of see that highlighted.
Great. And I love that example, because I had some students, for instance, wanting to do like a spelling, and that really doesn't get them to the higher level thinking and the analysis that you need. So you really have to think about what would work best for this case. All right, so moving on, we were going to keep saying over and over to use those rubrics. You want to review in step 2 the 5 rubrics for teach and assess, and make sure you include again everything that's level 3 and try to get to levels 4 and 5. And you're going to avoid again everything in levels 1 and 2. So we suggest that you record on multiple days throughout your 3 to 5 lessons. And again, like Darrell said, you want to record everything, and then you'll go back later and pick out those clips. And you're going to be writing at least 2 to 3 strong annotations for each video clip, and I'll show you what those look like. You can write more, and make sure that all 4 annotation titles are used at least once across your videos. And make sure, this is really important because otherwise you'll get an error code. Both you and the students' faces have to be visible. Okay, so make sure that you're showing you and the students' faces. So even if you put the camera to the side of the class and it's showing you on the side and the students' faces, that works. All right, so here's the video clips. I'm going to talk about each one in detail. And again, if you have questions, we'll stop again in a little bit. So clip 1, you're going to show instruction and assessment. And this is where you're going to highlight what we were talking about, academic language development. So you need to use some type of activity where you're teaching them the academic language of those 3 to 5 lessons. So maybe doing something interactive, maybe where you're showing it on the screen with a visual and then having them practice in pairs, or some type of Kagan structure. So you're really showing them interacting and learning those academic language words. And in some way, you're also able to informally assess them. Okay. Video clip 2 is the use of educational technology. And that's where the students themselves need to be using technology. And I wanted to share, I actually have this rubric ready because this is one of the rubrics that a lot of students ask about. So here's the educational technology. And This is a level 3, where students are able to use the educational technology to demonstrate context-specific learning goals. And what we've been told is it needs to be interactive and it needs to be beyond something like Quizlet. So if you do something like Quizlet, you're going to get a level 2. So it needs to be something where they're doing, like Seesaw or Google Docs, or making slide presentations, or Jamboard or Padlet, one of those interactive, we have all kinds of technology they can use. To get a level 4, they need to use have choice in their technology. So for instance, maybe they could choose between Jamboard or Padlet, or they could make a video. And then they also need to have it where they're working in a group. So either across the school in their classroom, or even across, they said, like it says on here, like pen pals, like where they're working with another school. And then to get a 5, you can see that they need to use do all of 3, all of 4, but then they're also able to extend beyond the learning goals and do something above and beyond to create and add something, like they said, like add images or do something above and beyond in the technology. All right, so I wanted to show you that because that's a common one that we get questions on. And I'll go back to here. Here we go. All right. And then your video clip 3 is going to be instruction and assessment of content. And this is where you're going to highlight students using higher order thinking. So you do need to have students doing higher order thinking. And you want it in your annotation title, you want to actually, again, highlight what specific higher order thinking word you're having them do. And then the 4th clip is where you're going to have show the students completing the self-assessment. And what's really important here, we're told as assessors that you have to explain to students how to use that self-assessment rubric. So it has to open with you explaining this is the rubric and this is how you complete it. You'll tell students, remember, this is not for a grade. This is so I can learn about your knowledge and how you feel that you're doing so far in the content area. And then the video should show the students working on the rubric, and you going around and having at least a couple of conversations where you're asking them, oh, I can see that you scored yourself a level 3. Can you tell me a little bit more why you scored yourself a level 3? So in that video clip, again, you need to have those 3 things, you going over the rubric, the students starting to complete it, and you having conversations and giving feedback with a couple of the students. So let me do one more slide and then we'll stop for questions. Does that work, Darrell? Or do you want to stop here?
That's
okay.
Good.
Okay. So I wanted to also talk about, related to the video clips, are the annotation titles, and they're 2 separate things. Sometimes students confuse them. So the video clips you're going to upload just like you did for cycle 1 to the Pearson website, and then it will let you click on specific minutes in the video, and you'll be able to then input the annotation titles, and it will timestamp it for you. So the 4 annotation titles you need to include are assessing student learning and the development of academic language. So you're able to use that title across any of the 4 videos. You have to use it at least 1 time. Students using educational technology, and that may be in a couple of the videos, but it definitely has to be in video clip 2. Providing content-specific feedback to students. Again, that's going to probably be across a lot of your videos. So you can write about it in each video clip that you use it. And then the last annotation is assessing student learning and the use of developmentally appropriate higher order thinking skills. So again, for sure, you'll have this one in video clip 3, but you might also have it in multiple video clips. Maybe they're also using it in technology. You do use higher order thinking also when you do a self-assessment. So you probably have it in that video clip as well. Okay, so I know there's usually lots of questions on videos. So do we have any, Darrell?
Yeah, I think I've got most of the front end ones, but there's a couple of good kindergarten ones about that technology. So how can we use technology with kinder, including how do we get kinders so we can get a 3 or a 4? So ideas about using technology with kindergarten.
Right, so you can use like even we were talking earlier about like sorting activities, there's a lot of great online games where that's above a Quizlet because they're doing some sorting, so where they can actually draw lines and connect things. Any of those type of activities would be appropriate. You could have them work in groups, that would get you up a little bit. And then as far as choice, you could have them choose between maybe two different options for sorting. If they are able to write, of course, you could have them, do some type of Jamboard. And then remind me, I'm going blank on the video one. There's one where everyone posts a video. It's like Padlet, but it's video instead. Do you know what I'm talking about? Anyone know that?
I've seen a Flipgrid or a
Flipgrid,
VidGrid.
yes.
Yeah.
Flipgrid
Yeah.
can
And
work
so,
great too, because then they are able to orally record. So maybe they're reading, if it's a language arts, they're reading something and then they could orally record their response, like on Flipgrid. So that's another idea for kindergarten.
yeah.
But you give
What
them a
I've
choice
seen,
between two things. Go ahead.
yeah, and what I've seen has been the most successful is that when the time comes to work with educational technology, a lot of our kinder and TK teachers transition into center work. And they transition their lesson into that, and they work with in a smaller group with the technology that allows you to manage behavior and to help students as they navigate that. And of course, one of the pieces of suggestion you'll hear later is all this stuff you should try before you do it on your TPA. So this should not be the first time they do self-assessment, shouldn't be the first time they've ever used technology. We all know that because we know how things go on the first try. So that's something I've seen that's worked pretty well for my TK and K teachers also. I tried to include on Sarah Steed's question, I tried to include all those things. I think she was referring to the clip 4. And so, Shana, just to clarify, teachers showing them how to use the rubric, students using the rubric. I thought the feedback they could get evidence on the feedback from template H that it didn't have to be in the video now as of this year.
Correct. It doesn't have to be in the video. If you're able to get it, that's great. But that would be not a priority. The main thing is you have to go over the rubric and show them working on the rubric.
Yeah, and so that's where it gets tight. So if it gets tight, those first two things have to be there. Template H is going to give you a prompt to how you gave feedback, and that can be your evidence for that. In clip 3, it asks candidates to demonstrate in the moment adjustments. How do you coach student teachers to do this on purpose? well, well, after this, we have the really long thing, which is how do you get people to do some of this stuff? I think sometimes in the moment adjustments are not as complex as you think. So if I'm going around and if I am monitoring students as they work in groups, let's say they're working on a task together, and I go around and monitor them. And as I see a group is having a misunderstanding about something, I can stop and I can refresh a content area with that group. I see that several groups are having a challenge. I can stop for a moment. I can redirect the class. All those redirections and additional instruction, that's all in the moment adjustments to instruction. You didn't plan to do that. And so I think you start on a small level like that in helping them to see it's okay to go off script if you notice something in your monitoring that needs a little extra instruction, a little more clarification, some prompting through questioning, kind of depends on the sophistication. You want to add to that, Shana?
No, that's exactly right. It doesn't have to be complex. It can even be like, for instance, if it's a math and they're holding up individual whiteboards and you call on a few students to explain their work and then you build on what they said. That would be an in the moment adjustment because you didn't script it out. It was something that happened then and you built on that.
Yep. For clip 2, would Nearpod be a good platform to use? It all depends actually on what they do. The key thing that you're looking for is to do something with the technology that you could not do with a plain old piece of paper. That's a simple way of thinking about it. It's supposed to enhance the instruction. So I've seen things on Nearpod that are basically a worksheet on the computer, and I've seen things on Nearpod that are pretty astounding in that regard. Is it okay to use a small group to show technology? We talked about that already. Actually, a technology video is kind of cool. You don't have to be in it. So finally, for once, you don't have to worry about what you look like on that day and what you sound like, because we all know that we don't like the way we look and sound. Most of us don't. But that is how we look and sound. And so that one only has to show the students. Other questions, that's it. I think we can move forward. I'll keep responding to some, and then we'll pause to do the rest.
Perfect. So then you've done all your video clips, you've taught your lessons, and you've given your formal, all 3 of your assessments, including your formal assessment. So this is the part where you're actually going to look at the 3 work samples you submitted, but also your entire class. So you're going to reflect in detail on your entire class and those 3 students where they either met, exceeded, or did not meet expectations. So there'll be a section to reflect on the whole class and then those 3 students. So the reason we were talking about you don't want to use multiple choice is you're going to have to write a few pages on analyzing trends that you notice on the formal assessment. So you'll write about what worked well, what are students doing the learning goals and they've actually met those, and what do students still need additional help or reteach in those areas. So you'll analyze the trends, both for the whole class, but also your 3 students where you uploaded their work. Something that's very important here is you do need to reference back to your steps 1 and 2. This is a big part of your score. So before you start writing this, you want to reread your steps 1 and 2, and then you want to put on what I call kind of your lens of reflection, because you're not going to just be reciting what happened, but you're going to be reflecting on, okay, this is what I was planning to do. This is what actually ended up happening, and this is the students' scores. So I'm going to reflect on all of these pieces of evidence, and it's going to tell me what I need to do next in my instruction, whether it's going to be a reteach for a small group or going to be a whole class lesson. All right, and then finally, step 4, you're going to take all of that data that you collected, and you're going to decide if you're going to do a reteach or review lesson or an extension lesson. And these can be whole group or small group. And you are going to be recording this reteach or extension lesson, a 5-minute clip. So the biggest areas that you get scores for in this is that you really make your decision based off the data that you reflected on and analyzed in the previous step, in step 3. So for instance, if I'm analyzing and maybe I was covering 3 learning goals, and 2 of the learning goals the class did well in, but the second learning goal, a lot of the class had struggles and they scored the lowest in that area. So I would, in my explanation, I would explain that I'm going to center in on learning goal number 2 based on the assessment data. And I actually want to go back and cite that assessment data again. And then I'm going to plan, because it was the whole class that struggled with that particular learning goal, that I would plan a whole class lesson, because that's what my data showed. If my data showed that a small group of 5 students needed a reteach, then I would go into an explanation of the data that led me to that decision and why I decided to do a reteach lesson. If all of the class showed that they met the learning goals, then I would do an extension lesson. So the thing you want to think about for the reteach, most people end up doing a reteach because usually there's at least a small group of students that need that, is that you also have to teach it in a different way. So if I taught, going back to my example of telling time to the half hour and the hour, but also second graders have to learn how to tell elapsed time. So how to tell like how much time has passed. And that's an area they commonly struggle in. So if I taught it one way in the beginning in my 3 to 5 lessons, but on the formal assessments, my whole class is still struggling with that concept, I need to think of a different way based on what I know about my students to teach that concept. So I can't teach it the same way because it didn't work well for my students that way. So I'm going to think about, based on what I know about them, how am I going to teach this in a different way? And then I'm going to film that reteach lesson. And you're also going to have one annotation title that you do that explains, again, why you're doing that reteach. Okay. So that's a lot of information. Just want to review this and then we'll get to some more questions. When you're done writing, you want to go back again and go through each one of the rubrics. The rubrics are really, like Darrell was saying, your answer key. And you want to start again with a level 3 and make sure you absolutely have everything in that center column, and then try to get to levels 4 and 5. You want to avoid levels 1 and 2. If you can not find evidence of at least a 3, then you need to go back and revise your writing. You're going to do this for all 9 rubrics. And then once you're done reviewing your rubrics, you've gone and read through everything, that's when you're ready to submit your work. All right, so we'll do the roadmap, and then I'm sure we have some more questions. So just as a review, this is what you're doing. We've been talking about this tonight. You're going to start with getting to know your students. Again, you can use your cycle 1 unless you're in a new class. You'll gather more information. You're going to take that information that you learned about your students, and you're going to build a learning segment of 3 to 5 lessons. Within those 3 to 5 lessons, you're going to write in detail about 3 assessments: an informal, formal, and a self-assessment. Then you're going to record yourself in step 3 here, doing 4 video clips, and you're going to do those annotation titles. Then in step 4, you'll reflect on those videos, how the lessons went, and the formal assessment, along with the informal and the self-assessment. And then you're going to take all that information and apply it to deciding, are you going to do a reteach or an extension lesson? Then step 6, you're going to revise, look at every single rubric one more time before you submit. So, Darrell, anything you want to add, or I'm sure we have some questions in there.
Yeah, I'll pick up a question here in just a second. One thing with that reteach lesson that's really critical is when you look at your formative assessment, you analyze it. You're not just analyzing student performance, but you're also analyzing what was most and least effective about your instruction. And that gives you a cue as to how you should reteach in a different way. And so you can justify using this different way because something you said was least effective, you're not going to reuse. Someone did ask an interesting question, and that was that, so if you have just a couple of students who didn't meet one of the learning goals, are we not able to do an extension? Whether you do an extension or a reteach, that isn't the thing that gets you a higher score. What gets you a higher score is how closely it is aligned to your analysis of your assessment. That's the big key. And so if you've made a clear case based off of your evidence from your formative, informative, and student self-assessments that students are ready to move ahead, and you do an extension activity, you can verify that. You can verify why these methods you're using are effective, then you're clear to go ahead and use an extension activity. It's the verification of it. It's the data-driven support of it. That's what matters. Reteach or extension, the evaluators don't care which one you use. They want to see that it is supported by the data. So other questions? All right. Well, we thank you for coming along with us. You want to show the last clip there, last slide. We thank you for coming. We will hang out here for a little bit and answer any more specific questions that you might have about your specific situation or something you wanted to ask, but maybe didn't want to ask the whole 45 people. But we appreciate you coming. Watch for the upload on CCTE YouTube page. You can listen to this information as many times as you want. Like I said, if you get to a place where you're ready to do this work and you're looking for support, we encourage you to reach out to the institution you got your credential from. They all have TPA coordinators, and those folks are excited. I'm hopefully, as much as Shana and I are, to come and help you as you're trying to traverse this. So I'm going to